Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Katherine Stewart, who's a journalist whose recent work has appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, The Atlantic, and The Guardian. She's the author of The Good News Club, The Christian Right Stealth Assault on American Children. And her latest book is the award-winning The Power Worshippers, Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, now out in paperback. And she also has an article at the New Republic, The Rise of Spirit Warriors on the Christian Right. Welcome to Background Briefing, Katherine Stewart.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us, Katherine. And just in terms of the politics of the Christian right, I just wanted to touch on it, given that earlier this week, Trump, in an interview, said that evangelical leaders are showing signs of disloyalty towards him because they haven't endorsed him in the 2024 campaign. And then Franklin Graham has come out and saying, and he was a big booster of Trump, of course, in 2016 and 2020. And he's come out and saying he's not going to endorse Trump, as has Robert Jeffress, who was also a big Trump booster. And he just had a big rally with Mike Pence and thanked Mike Pence for saving the Constitution on January the 6th. And incidentally, today we learned that classified documents were found at Mike Pence's home in Indiana. So what do you make of the politics on the religious right? They seem to be gravitating to support Ron DeSantis, even though he, of course, is Catholic.
Well, Ron DeSantis may be Catholic, but he's doing everything he needs to do to win the support of the leadership of the Christian nationalist movement, and he'll absolutely give them everything they want, the way Trump did. He's behaving, frankly, like an authoritarian. He's litigating, instead of solving the problems of his state, he's litigating what he calls woke culture and focusing on sort of issues that, frankly, don't have a ton of relevance to most American families. He's censoring books. He's trying to demonstrate his so-called pro-life bona fides. He's even citing biblical passages that are intended to operate almost like as messaging or dog whistle to some of the more radical elements of the movement. This is why Trump is calling him Ron DeSanctimonious. Right before the election, Ron DeSantis's campaign actually released an ad claiming that God chose Ron DeSantis in order to save the country. I don't know if you've seen this ad, but it's really something. It said, on the 8th day, God chose a fighter, something like that, and, promoted Ron DeSantis as a sort of kingly chosen person by God. And here's the thing. The Christian nationalist movement leadership delivers such a large and reliable slice of the Republican vote that anyone who wants to have a career, certainly in the national level and very often on the state level, and who's a Republican, knows that they have to give these leaders what they want in order to get that slice of the vote. So I think a lot of the religious right leaders do not want Donald Trump. They think he has too much baggage, and they'd rather go for someone like Ron DeSantis, who's frankly a bit clever, perhaps comes with a bit less baggage, but is still going to do what they want at the end of the day. He's going to appoint right-wing justices to the courts. He's going to give them the policies that they want, the privileges that they want, and of course, the access to public money that they're very much after.
So let's talk about spirit warrior Christianity, which DeSantis is embracing. He said, quote, "Put on the full armor of God, stand firm against the left's schemes." And these schemes of the left have reached all kinds of bizarre notions in the minds of Christian spirit warriors. They believe there's a demonic portal that's opened above the White House.
That's right. Look, there's I think let's pull back for a minute and talk about the fact that religion in America is evolving. It's not a static thing. I spend a lot of time looking at the religious right in America, and within that group, there's frankly been a substantial shift in the direction of increased, I would say, militancy and support for authoritarianism. And some of the new religious movements, such as right-wing Pentecostalism and neo-charismatic movements, are completely identified with this militancy and support for authoritarianism. And, there's a group called the New Apostolic Reformation, and there are other neo-charismatic groups. But what we're really talking about is not any particular denomination or collection of denominations, but a certain style of religion and a shared language. And it even shows up among some right-wing Catholics like Ron DeSantis or Mike Flynn, who identifies as a Catholic, or some right-wing Presbyterians and Baptists or non-denominational Christians and others. So
and Bolsonaro, right? He's a Catholic.
Absolutely. So this kind of intensification of verbal warfare and references to spiritual warfare is very closely connected to shifts in the Christian nationalist movement's messaging and outreach. Over the past 15 years, I've been attending religious right conferences and strategy meetings and gatherings. And in recent years, this shift has been very much in evidence. So this past year, I attended the Road to Majority Conference. It's an annual conference sponsored by Ralph Reed's Faith and Freedom Coalition. And it took place in Tennessee. And there were 2 sessions on Seven Mountains Dominionism, the idea that the so-called right-thinking Christian should dominate and seize control of all the so-called mountains or molders of cultures to, what they call take dominion back from Satan. And look, for many years, folks who openly endorsed Seven Mountains Dominionism were nowhere near these major conferences of the Christian right. These kinds of ideas were considered too militant and too extreme and perhaps heretical. But these days, they are a regular feature of a lot of these types of conferences.
So there's also a component, is there not, in terms of these right-wing militias, like the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys? Aren't they also somehow dabbling in spirit warfare, I guess is the way to put it?
Absolutely. For a long time, some of these right-wing militia groups and white nationalist groups some of them had a sort of religious rhetoric that they used, a kind of religious ideology that was very much part of what they did. But I'm thinking about groups like the Proud Boys. They were not particularly a religious group. And all of a sudden, look, Trump, the movement pre-existed Trump, but he gave it rocket fuel. He really gave it a lot of power. And I think a lot of these groups recognized the power of exploiting religion. And all of a sudden, the Proud Boys started adopting much more overtly religious language.
So what is their militant end here? I mean, we know their religious philosophy is certainly not rooted in the Bible. It's, if anything, it's rooted in kind of Victorian English onward Christian soldiers kind of Christianity, isn't it?
Well, if you look at the roots of where this comes from, it's really about dominionism, a kind of authoritarian form of order. Movement leaders want 3 things. It's very clear. They want power and access, political access. They want policies that privilege certain approved groups in society and that sort of direct contempt toward people who are not seen as conforming, the sort of insider versus outsider game. And they want access to both private money and public money. And really, it's a game that's all about power. And that's where it all really comes from. We can see really deep roots in our society in America. We can actually see roots of this in the sort of pro-slavery theologians, such as leaders of the Southern Presbyterian Church, who actually argued for, they said, that slavery was scriptural and this was part of God's established order. And they cast those who were arguing for equality and racial justice as heretical and as demonic and satanic and as frankly socialist and communist. They were like very I would say the sort of segregationists who followed them said that if you were supporting desegregation, you were a socialist and a communist and godless and satanic and all that. But so sort of to trace the roots of this in our own society would take quite some time. But this is not remotely unique to America. This is a kind of situation that we see all over the world when you have leaders like Vladimir Putin in Russia, or let's not just look at Christianity, let's look at Modi in India, or let's look at the leaders in Iran. When these leaders bind themselves very tightly to ultra-conservative religious figures in their own countries in order to consolidate a more authoritarian form of political power. We rightly recognize this as religious nationalism, and they do it they do this sort of, bubble wrapping themselves in sanctimony in order to guard against any investigation of their corruption, guard against any investigation of the abuses they're perpetrating against their own people.
But we've seen this spirit warrior Christianity already in many ways capture countries in Central and South America. In Brazil, it's a powerful part of the support behind Bolsonaro, who narrowly lost in the last election. Guatemala, it's quite rife, is it not, in Guatemala? So are we becoming more like, as you say at the end of your article, let me just quote it, religion in America is starting to look more like religion in Brazil and Guatemala because America in some aspects is starting to resemble Brazil and Guatemala, increasingly unequal, bitterly divided, corrupt, rife with disinformation, and unstable.
That's true. A lot of people talk about political polarization in America, and they say that they note that we're polarized as never before, and the implication is that both sides are at fault. But there's one political party in our country that is really trying to promote conspiracism and disinformation. That is, they know if you can separate a large number of people from the facts, you can control them. You can control their vote much more easily. And it also makes it harder for the country to come together and tackle our real challenges, the challenges the bread and butter issues that matter to most American families. But for many of these so-called spirit warriors, they're promoting a kind of political chaos. And the chaos is the point. It makes a country less governable and less rational, and that clears the way for an authoritarian leader who can step up and, like a strongman, who can step in and say, I alone can fix it.
Well, Katherine, you're almost describing the Freedom Caucus that is the tail that wags the dog in terms of controlling the House since McCarthy sold his soul bit by bit to the point he has nothing left to these right-wing radicals that you describe, and they wrap themselves in religion, do they not? The Marjorie Taylor Greens, etc.
Absolutely, they absolutely do, and they're deeply irrational, and they're promoting irrationalism among their followers. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, how much of it do they believe? But in a way, it doesn't matter what they personally believe. We can't. I think most of us don't really think that Trump was, there studying the Bible every night or, really believing all that. He recognized that it was incredibly useful in exploiting the base.
But it has a kind of QAnon feel to it when they talk about demonic portals opening above the White House. I mean, that's a bit like this idea that the Democratic Party are all drinking babies' blood and are pedophiles. I mean, it's about as loony as that, isn't it?
It's true. Listen, if you can persuade a large number of people that they are in a literal battle between absolute good and absolute evil, and the consequences of political loss are too apocalyptic to ignore, and that they have an incredibly important role to play, it just, they'll justify any actions, no matter how radical. I think about January 6th, and I think about the fact that a lot of the people who stormed the Capitol had been really led to believe that the election was stolen. And so they were, prepared to perpetrate these incredibly radical actions and call themselves patriots, even as they are storming the Capitol and threatening to kill elected leaders and trashing our electoral system, which is the pillar of our democracy. But that sort of lie of the stolen election is really now at the heart of the Republican Party.
And the spirit warrior Christianity is at the heart of Pentecostalism, isn't it? And there are 600 million Pentecostalists worldwide, which is a quarter of all Christians. So this is not a fringe movement.
No, I mean, we have to remember that Pentecostalism in America is very diverse. And there are large numbers, for instance, of Black Pentecostal churches that are very much committed to equality, racial justice, and a sort of ethos of the common good. But this type of irrationalism, like not everyone caught up in the fervor for spirit warrior types of religion comes down on the same side of the political aisle. But the style of religion is ripe for political exploitation, mainly from the right, because it's a way of sort of directing a lot of people's sort of anxieties about their lives and telling them that they alone they have an incredibly important role to play. But then this sort of religious entrepreneurs sort of seize upon that and have used it to draw people into these sort of radical right movements.
Well, Katherine Stewart, I thank you so much for joining us here today.
Great to speak with you, as always.
Well, thank you, Katherine. And again, I've been speaking with Katherine Stewart, who's a journalist whose recent work has appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, The Atlantic, and The Guardian. And she's the author of The Good News Club, The Christian Right's Stealth Assault on America's Children. And her latest award-winning book is The Power Worshippers, Inside the Dangerous Rise of Christian Nationalism, now out in paperback. And she also has an article at the New Republic, The Rise of Spirit Warriors on the Christian Right. This has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producer Graham Fitzgibbon. And to help us sustain this program into the future and assure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate or publictruthmedia.org, where you will find our non-profit Public Truth Media Foundation, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And if you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we'll include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easy for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we also encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook at Ian Masters Media. And please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
The guy that lived next door in 305